Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time. Tonight, we'll drift back over 3,000 years to an era that would forever change the course of human civilization. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let yourself be transported to the Iron Age, a time when the world was vast and mysterious, when the glow of forge fires first began to illuminate the darkness of prehistory. Picture, if you will, a world emerging from the shadows of the Bronze Age. The year is approximately 1200 BCE, and across the ancient world, a revolution is quietly beginning. Not a revolution of armies or kingdoms, but something far more profound. A revolution of metal, of technology, of human possibility. In the gentle hills of Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, ancient smiths are discovering something extraordinary. Deep in the earth lie deposits of a reddish-brown ore, iron oxide, or as we know it, rust. But these early metallurgists have learned that with the right combination of heat, charcoal, and patience, this humble ore can be transformed into something far superior to the bronze their ancestors had used for centuries. The discovery wasn't sudden, like lightning splitting the night sky. Rather, it was gradual, like the slow lightning of dawn. For generations, iron had been considered almost magical. Meteoric iron, fallen from the heavens, was crafted into precious ornaments and ceremonial weapons. But now, human ingenuity had unlocked the secret of smelting terrestrial iron ore. Imagine the scene. A Bronze Age settlement nestled in a valley, smoke rising from cooking fires and workshop hearths. The familiar ring of bronze hammers on anvils suddenly joined by a new sound, the distinctive ping of iron being shaped. The smiths, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of furnaces burning at temperatures higher than ever before achieved, are creating tools that will outlast their makers by millennia. The transformation wasn't merely technological, it was social, economic, and cultural. Bronze required tin, a relatively rare metal that had to be traded across vast distances. This created networks of merchants and aristocrats who controlled the flow of materials and finished goods. But iron ore was abundant, found in deposits across the known world. For the first time in human history, superior metal tools could be produced locally, democratizing technology in a way that would echo through the ages. As you relax deeper into your pillows, envision the gradual spread of this knowledge. From the workshops of Anatolia, the secrets of ironworking traveled along trade routes like seeds on the wind. Phoenician merchants carried samples and techniques westward across the Mediterranean. Nomadic peoples bore the knowledge eastward into Central Asia and southward into Africa. The beginning of the Iron Age coincided with one of history's great periods of upheaval and migration. The late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw the mysterious decline of great civilizations. The Hittite Empire crumbled, Mycenaean Greece fell into darkness, and even mighty Egypt was weakened by invasions of the enigmatic Sea Peoples. In this chaos, new peoples emerged and spread across the ancient world. Let your mind drift to the windswept plains of Eastern Europe, where Indo-European tribes were beginning their great migrations. These were not massive armies marching in formation, but rather extended families and clans, moving slowly across the landscape with their livestock, their children, and their precious knowledge of ironworking. Picture a Celtic tribe in what would become France, settling in a valley that offers everything they need: fresh water, fertile soil, and most importantly, iron ore deposits in the nearby hills. The tribal elders choose a hill for their settlement, understanding instinctively the defensive advantages of high ground. Below, the river provides water and transportation. Around them, forests offer timber for construction and fuel for their forges. The settlement grows slowly over generations. Simple huts become more permanent structures. Cooking fires become specialized forges. The tribe's metalsmith, once a part-time craftsman, becomes a figure of central importance, his skills essential for creating the tools that will clear forests, plant crops, and defend the community. As winter nights grow long, the smith works by firelight, teaching his techniques to young apprentices. The knowledge is passed down not through written texts, for writing is still rare and mysterious, but through careful observation, patient practice, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Each hammer blow, each careful adjustment of the bellows, each judicious addition of charcoal is part of an ancient rhythm that connects the present to the deep past and extends into the uncertain future. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort. As we follow these early Iron Age peoples through their daily lives, the transition from bronze to iron wasn't accomplished in a single generation, or even several. Old bronze implements continued to be used and treasured long after iron techniques became known. Status and tradition often favored the older metal, just as today we might prefer antique furniture to modern manufactured goods. But gradually, inevitably, iron proved its superiority. Iron plowshares could break ground that bronze could not touch. Iron axes could fell trees with greater efficiency. Iron weapons held sharper edges and proved more durable in battle. The material advantages of iron created social and economic advantages for those who mastered its production and use. Now let your imagination carry you to the beautiful lakes and valleys of Austria, around 800 BCE. Here, in a region that archaeologists would later name Hallstatt after a small lakeside village, one of Europe's first great Iron Age cultures was flourishing. The Hallstatt people lived in a landscape of stunning natural beauty. Crystal-clear alpine lakes reflecting snow-capped peaks, dense forests of spruce and fir, and most importantly, rich deposits of salt. In the ancient world, salt was quite literally worth its weight in silver. It was essential for preserving food, especially meat, making long-distance trade and winter survival possible in ways that had never before been achieved. Picture a Hallstatt village on a misty morning. The lake's surface like polished metal, reflecting the early light. Smoke rises from numerous hearths, creating a soft haze that catches the golden rays of sunrise. The village is more prosperous than most settlements of its time. Thanks to the wealth generated by salt mining and iron production, the Hallstatt miners descend into carefully excavated shafts each morning, carrying bronze and iron tools, wearing leather garments, and carrying torches to light their way through the underground passages. The work is dangerous but profitable. The salt they extract will be traded across Europe, creating networks of commerce and cultural exchange that stretch from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean. Above ground, smiths work the iron ore that is also abundant in this region. But these are no longer the simple forges of earlier times. Hallstatt metallurgy represents a significant advancement in ironworking technology. They have learned to create steel by carefully controlling the carbon content of their iron, producing metal that is both harder and more flexible than pure iron. The wealth of the Hallstatt people is evident in their burials. Let your mind drift to the funeral of a Hallstatt chieftain, conducted on a hillside overlooking the valley. The body is placed in a wooden chamber, surrounded by an extraordinary array of grave goods. There are iron swords with ornate bronze hilts, decorated pottery, amber beads from the distant Baltic, and even silk from far-off China, carried along the earliest silk roads. But perhaps most fascinating are the everyday items: iron knives, bronze fibulae, safety pins for fastening clothing, ceramic vessels for storing food and drink. These objects tell us that the Hallstatt people enjoyed a standard of living that was remarkably high for their time, with specialized craftsmen producing goods of both utility and beauty. As you settle more deeply into sleep, imagine the gentle sounds of a Hallstatt evening, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft conversations of families around their hearths, the rhythmic hammering from a late working smith's forge. This was a society in balance, prosperous enough to support artists and craftsmen, stable enough to engage in long-distance trade, and sophisticated enough to develop complex burial rituals that suggest deep spiritual beliefs. The Hallstatt culture would endure for over 3 centuries, creating the first truly European civilization of the Iron Age. Their influence spread across Central Europe, from the Rhine to the Danube, creating a cultural unity that prefigured later European developments. From the salt mines of Austria, let your dreams carry you southward to the sun-drenched islands and peninsulas of the Aegean Sea. Here, around 800 BCE, Greek civilization was emerging from the Dark Age that had followed the collapse of Mycenaean culture 4 centuries earlier. The Greeks of the early Iron Age lived in small communities scattered across a landscape of extraordinary beauty, rocky islands rising from azure seas, olive groves silvered by Mediterranean light, terraced hillsides where grapevines clung to ancient stone walls. These communities, which would eventually become the famous city-states of classical Greece, were initially quite modest affairs. Imagine the Greek city of Corinth in its early Iron Age incarnation, not yet the magnificent metropolis it would later become, but rather a collection of simple mud brick houses clustered around a natural spring. The local metalsmith has recently acquired the knowledge of ironworking, probably through trade with Phoenician merchants, and his workshop represents one of the most advanced technologies available in the Greek world. The smith's apprentice, A young man whose name has been lost to history carefully tends the bellows while his master shapes a spear point on the anvil. The workshop is hot and smoky, filled with the acrid smell of burning charcoal and the sharp ring of metal on metal, but there's something almost musical about the rhythm of the work. A steady beat that seems to echo the fundamental rhythms of human creation. Outside, the life of the early Greek polis, city-state, unfolds in patterns that will become familiar across the Hellenic world. Farmers bring their produce to the small agora, marketplace, their donkeys laden with amphorae of olive oil and wine. Fishermen return from the sea with their catch, adding the salt smell of the ocean to the complex bouquet of scents that characterizes every ancient settlement. But perhaps most importantly, in a corner of the agora, a traveling bard has begun to recite the ancient stories that preserve the memory of the heroic age. His voice, trained through years of practice, carries clearly across the square as he tells of Achilles and Hector, of Odysseus and his long journey home, of gods and heroes whose deeds occurred in the mythical time before the present age of iron. These stories, passed down orally for generations, are beginning to be written down using an alphabet adapted from the Phoenicians. This development, the return of literacy to the Greek world, will prove to be one of the most significant cultural achievements of the Iron Age. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the scribe carefully forming each letter on papyrus, preserving for all time the stories that had previously existed only in the memories of bards. The Greeks are also beginning to expand beyond their original homeland. Driven by population pressure and the search for new trading opportunities, they are establishing colonies across the Mediterranean world. From Massalia, Marseille, in southern France to Cyrenaica in North Africa, from Sicily and southern Italy to the distant shores of the Black Sea, Greek settlers are carrying their language, their gods, and their ironworking technology to new lands. Picture a Greek colonization expedition setting sail from the mother city in a small fleet of merchant vessels. The colonists carry with them not just their personal possessions, but the essential elements of Greek civilization: sacred fire from the hearth of the mother city, seeds for planting, and most importantly, skilled craftsmen including metalworkers who can establish the industrial foundation of the new settlement. From the Greek world, let your dreaming mind travel northward to the hills and valleys of central Italy, where one of the ancient world's most fascinating civilizations was flourishing during the Iron Age. The Etruscans, whose true name for themselves was probably Ravenna, remain one of history's great mysteries. Their language only partially understood, their origins still debated by scholars. What we do know is that Etruscan civilization represented one of the highest achievements of Iron Age culture. Their cities, built on hilltops throughout modern-day Tuscany, Umbria, and Lazio, were marvels of urban planning and engineering. Imagine the Etruscan city of Tarquinia on a peaceful evening around 600 BCE, its walls glowing golden in the setting sun. The city's streets are paved with stone, an innovation that won't reach many other parts of Europe for centuries. Houses are built of stone and timber, with terracotta roof tiles that give the cityscape a warm reddish hue. But most impressive are the public works, sophisticated drainage systems, monumental gates decorated with carved figures, and temples built in a distinctly Etruscan style that will later influence Roman architecture. In the workshops of Tarquinia, Etruscan craftsmen are creating objects of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication. Their bronze work is renowned throughout the Mediterranean world. They produce mirrors decorated with engraved mythological scenes, elegant candelabra, and ceremonial vessels that demonstrate both artistic vision and technical mastery. But it's their ironworking that represents perhaps their most significant contribution to Iron Age technology. The Etruscans have access to the iron ore of the island of Elba, and they have developed smelting techniques that allow them to produce iron of exceptional quality. Their weapons and tools are sought after throughout Italy and beyond. Let your imagination drift to an Etruscan forge, where master smiths are working on a commission for one of the local aristocrats. The workshop is larger and more sophisticated than most Iron Age forges, with multiple hearths and specialized tools for different aspects of metalworking. The smiths have learned to create pattern-welded steel, folding and forging the metal repeatedly to create blades with distinctive watered patterns that are both beautiful and incredibly strong. The Etruscans are also remarkable for their attitudes toward women and social organization. Unlike most ancient societies, Etruscan women enjoyed considerable freedom and status. They attended public events, participated in banquets alongside men, and could own property in their own names. Etruscan tomb paintings show us scenes of daily life that seem remarkably egalitarian compared to contemporary Greek or Roman society. Picture an Etruscan funeral banquet, conducted in an underground tomb decorated with colorful frescoes. The deceased is honored not with grim solemnity, but with celebration. Music, dancing, and feasting that celebrates life even in the face of death. The walls are painted with scenes of the afterlife, depicted not as a gloomy underworld, but as a continuation of the pleasures of earthly existence. These tomb paintings provide us with unique insights into Etruscan daily life. We see musicians playing double flutes and lyres, dancers performing elaborate routines, athletes competing in games, and craftsmen at work in their shops. The overall impression is of a society that valued both artistic achievement and material prosperity, that celebrated life's pleasures while maintaining deep spiritual beliefs. As you sink deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine the sounds of an Etruscan city at twilight. The last hammer blows from the workshops, the call of vendors in the marketplace, the distant sound of flutes from a private banquet, the gentle conversation of families gathered around their evening meals. This was Iron Age civilization at its most refined, a culture that would profoundly influence the Romans, who would eventually absorb Etruscan territory into their growing empire. Now let your dreams carry you northward and westward, beyond the Alps, to the vast forests and rolling hills where Celtic civilization reached its magnificent flowering during the later Iron Age. The Celts, known to the Romans as Galli, and to themselves by dozens of tribal names, occupied a territory that stretched from Ireland to central Turkey, from Scotland to Spain. This was not a single unified culture, but rather a family of related peoples who shared similar languages, religious beliefs, artistic traditions, and most importantly for our story, metallurgical techniques that represented the pinnacle of Iron Age achievement. The period from about 450 to 50 BCE is known to archaeologists as the La Tène culture, named after a site on the shores of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland where extraordinary Celtic metalwork was first discovered. Imagine a Celtic oppidum, a fortified hilltop settlement, in what is now France. During the height of La Tène culture around 200 BCE, the settlement is surrounded by massive earthwork fortifications topped with wooden palisades. Within these defenses, the town is a bustling center of craft production and trade, its narrow streets lined with workshops where skilled artisans practice their ancient crafts. In one workshop, a Celtic metalsmith is creating a masterpiece, a bronze mirror with elaborate abstract decoration covering its back surface. The patterns flow and interweave in designs that seem to capture the very essence of natural forms. Vines, leaves, birds, and fantastic creatures that exist only in the realm of Celtic imagination. This is art that speaks to something deep in the human soul, decoration that transforms functional objects into works of profound beauty. But it's the ironworking that represents the true technological achievement of Celtic civilization. Celtic smiths have perfected techniques of steel production that won't be matched in many parts of Europe until the medieval period. They create swords of extraordinary quality, long, flexible blades that can bend nearly double without breaking, weapons that are both practical tools of warfare and objects of artistic beauty. Picture the forge where such a sword is being created. The smith, a figure of almost magical status in Celtic society, works with an understanding of metallurgy that has been passed down through generations of careful observation and experimentation. He knows exactly how to control the temperature of his fire, how to judge the color of the glowing metal, how to add just the right amount of charcoal to achieve the carbon content that will produce the finest steel. The creation of a fine sword is not merely a technical process, it's a spiritual one as well. Celtic smiths believe that they are not just shaping metal, but imbuing it with qualities that transcend the merely physical. Some swords are given names like living beings. They are blessed by druids and become heirlooms passed down through generations of warriors. Speaking of druids, let your mind drift to a sacred grove deep in a Celtic forest, where these mysterious priest-philosophers are conducting their rituals by the light of a full moon. The druids are the keepers of Celtic learning and tradition, their training taking 20 years or more. They memorize vast amounts of poetry, law, history, and religious lore, passing it down orally from generation to generation. The druids understand iron not just as a practical material, but as something with spiritual significance. Iron, they believe, has the power to ward off evil spirits and supernatural threats. Iron knives are used in religious ceremonies, iron amulets protect the wearer from harm, and iron deposits are considered sacred sites where the gods have placed their gifts within the earth. Celtic society is organized around warrior bands led by heroic chieftains. These are not savage barbarians, as Roman propaganda would later claim, but sophisticated people who value poetry and music as much as martial prowess. A Celtic feast is an elaborate affair where warriors recite their deeds. Bards sing the praises of heroes both living and dead, and the finest metalwork serves both practical and ceremonial functions. Imagine such a feast in the great hall of a Celtic chieftain. The walls are hung with shields and weapons that are works of art as much as tools of war. The chieftain wears a torque, a twisted metal collar of gold or electrum that proclaims his status. The drinking vessels are of decorated bronze or silver, the serving pieces of iron inlaid with precious metals in intricate patterns. As the night deepens and you drift toward sleep, picture the Celtic lands under starlight. Vast forests where druids maintain their sacred groves, hilltop settlements where the forges glow through the night, and rivers where deposited weapons and ornaments await rediscovery by future archaeologists. This is Iron Age culture at its most sophisticated, a civilization that values both technological achievement and artistic beauty, both martial courage and scholarly learning. From the settled lands of Celtic Europe, let your dreams carry you eastward across great rivers and endless grasslands to the vast steppes of southern Russia and Central Asia. Here, during the Iron Age, a remarkable nomadic civilization flourished, the Scythians, master horsemen whose influence stretched from the Black Sea to the borders of China. The Scythians represent a completely different approach to Iron Age life from the settled, agricultural peoples we've encountered so far. These were nomads who lived in felt tents, followed their herds across thousands of miles of grassland, and developed a mobile culture perfectly adapted to the rhythms of steppe life. Picture a Scythian camp on a spring evening, somewhere in the vastness of the Ukrainian steppe around 400 BCE. The circular felt tents, called yurts, are scattered across the landscape like flowers in a meadow. Horses graze nearby, their bells creating a gentle music that carries across the grassland. The setting sun casts long shadows, and the first stars are appearing in a sky that seems infinitely vast above the endless plain. The Scythians were not primitive nomads, despite what some ancient Greek and Roman writers claimed. They were sophisticated people who had developed technologies and social institutions perfectly suited to nomadic life. Their metalworking, in particular, represented some of the finest achievements of Iron Age craftsmanship. Scythian smiths faced unique challenges. Unlike their settled counterparts, they couldn't maintain permanent forges in fixed locations. Instead, they developed portable metallurgy, techniques for working metal that could be practiced on the move. They created remarkable objects, golden ornaments in the famous animal style that depicts fantastic creatures locked in eternal combat, iron weapons of extraordinary quality, and horse trappings that turn every mount into a work of mobile art. Imagine a Scythian metalsmith at work beside his tent, using a small portable forge heated with dried dung rather than charcoal. Despite these limitations, he creates objects of stunning beauty, a golden plaque showing a stag with elaborate antlers, or silver horse decorations that will catch the light as the rider gallops across the steppe. These objects serve not just as decoration, but as displays of wealth and status in a society where such displays must be portable. The Scythians were master horsemen at a time when much of the world was still learning to ride. They developed the composite bow, a weapon that could be used effectively from horseback and had greater range and power than simple wooden bows. Combined with their mobility, this gave Scythian warriors advantages that made them feared throughout the ancient world. But perhaps even more impressive was their social organization. Scythian society was remarkably egalitarian, especially compared to the hierarchical civilizations of the Mediterranean world. While they had chiefs and nobles, the differences in status were less extreme than in settled societies. Women enjoyed considerable freedom and could own property, engage in trade, and even serve as warriors. The most spectacular evidence of Scythian culture comes from their burial mounds, called kurgans. These enormous earthwork constructions dot the steppes from Ukraine to Siberia, some rising hundreds of feet above the surrounding plain. The most elaborate kurgans contain burial chambers that are essentially underground palaces, filled with treasures that demonstrate the wealth and artistic sophistication of nomadic civilization. Let your imagination descend into one of these burial chambers, perhaps the famous Pazyryk tombs in the Altai Mountains. The permafrost has preserved organic materials that normally decay, giving us an unprecedented view into Scythian daily life. We find felt carpets with intricate designs, leather clothing decorated with gold plaques, wooden furniture inlaid with precious materials, and even the tattooed bodies of Scythian nobles, their skin decorated with elaborate animal designs. But most impressive are the horses. Scythian chiefs were buried with their finest mounts, animals that in life had been decorated with elaborate harnesses and trappings. These horses, preserved in the frozen ground for over 2,000 years, show us the intimate relationship between the Scythians and their animals. Each horse was an individual, carefully trained and decorated, valued not just as transportation, but as a partner in the nomadic life. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine the sounds of a Scythian night, the distant neighing of horses, the soft conversation around campfires, the music of traditional songs that preserve the oral history of the tribe. This was Iron Age civilization adapted to movement rather than settlement, a culture that found beauty and meaning in the endless journey across the grasslands rather than in the accumulation of fixed possessions. From the steppes of Eurasia, let your dreams carry you southward, following the great trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with the heart of Africa. Here, in the kingdoms that stretched along the Nile and across the savannas of West Africa, Iron Age civilizations developed their own distinctive approaches to metallurgy, statecraft, and cultural expression. In the ancient kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now Sudan, African metallurgists were developing iron-working techniques that were among the most advanced in the ancient world. The capital city of Meroe, located between the Blue and White Niles, became known throughout the ancient world as a center of iron production. Greek and Roman writers called it the Birmingham of ancient Africa. So numerous were its forges and so constant was the smoke that rose from its furnaces. Picture Meroe at its height, around 100 BCE. The city rises from the banks of the Nile like a vision from a dream, its temples and palaces built of sandstone that glows golden in the desert sun. But it's the industrial quarter that makes Meroe unique among ancient cities. Here, dozens of furnaces operate continuously, their fires tended by skilled metallurgists who have learned to extract iron from local ores with remarkable efficiency. The Kushite smiths have developed a distinctive technology that allows them to produce iron in larger quantities than most contemporary civilizations. Their furnaces are taller and more efficient than those used elsewhere, and they have learned to use local hardwoods to create the high temperatures necessary for successful smelting. The result is a surplus of iron that they can trade with Egypt, Rome, and the civilizations of the Red Sea. But Meroe is not just an industrial center. It's also a royal capital where African rulers have created a unique synthesis of Egyptian, Nubian, and Mediterranean influences. The pyramids of Meroe, smaller than their Egyptian counterparts but no less impressive, rise from the desert like geometric mountains. Inside these pyramids, Kushite royalty rests surrounded by iron weapons, golden jewelry, and ceramics that demonstrate the sophisticated artistic traditions of Iron Age Africa. Let your imagination drift to the funeral of a Kushite queen, conducted with all the pomp and ceremony befitting one of the most powerful rulers of the ancient world. The queen, whose name has been preserved in Meroitic hieroglyphs that we are still learning to read, is laid to rest with an iron spear that served as a symbol of royal authority, golden amulets that protected her in the afterlife, and ceramic vessels filled with provisions for the journey to the realm of the ancestors. The Kushites were not the only Iron Age civilization to flourish in Africa. Far to the west, in what is now Nigeria, the Nok culture was developing its own distinctive approach to iron technology and artistic expression. The Nok people, whose culture flourished from about 500 BCE to 200 CE, are best known today for their remarkable terracotta sculptures, life-sized human heads with elaborate hairstyles and distinctive facial features. But it was their ironworking that made Nok culture possible. Imagine a Nok village in the Jos Plateau of central Nigeria, around 300 BCE. The village is smaller than Meroe, but no less significant in the development of Iron Age technology. The local smiths have developed techniques for working the iron-rich laterite soils of West Africa, creating furnaces that can reach the temperatures necessary to extract iron from these challenging ores. The iron produced by Nok smiths enables the agricultural revolution that supports their increasingly complex society. Iron hoes allow farmers to cultivate the heavy clay soils that couldn't be worked effectively with stone tools. Iron axes make it possible to clear forested areas for agriculture. Iron weapons provide security against both human enemies and the dangerous animals of the African savanna. But perhaps most remarkably, knock artists are using iron tools to create their extraordinary terracotta sculptures. The precision and detail possible with iron carving tools allows them to create works of art that capture individual personality with remarkable skill. These sculptures, discovered by archaeologists only in the 20th century, demonstrate that Iron Age Africa was home to artistic traditions of extraordinary sophistication. Picture a knock artist at work in his studio, using iron tools to carefully shape the clay that will become a portrait of a village elder. The work requires not just technical skill but deep cultural knowledge. The elaborate hairstyles and ornaments depicted in knock sculpture represent specific social roles and cultural meanings that we are still trying to understand. As the night deepens and you settle into sleep, imagine the sounds of Iron Age Africa, the rhythmic hammering from the forges of Meroe, the songs of knock artists as they work their clay, the distant roar of lions from the savannas beyond the villages, and the gentle lapping of the Nile against the walls of ancient cities. This was Iron Age civilization adapted to African landscapes and climates, demonstrating the universal human capacity for technological innovation and artistic achievement. From Africa, let your dreams carry you across the Indian Ocean and the vast expanses of Asia to the Middle Kingdom, China during the Han Dynasty, where Iron Age technology reached perhaps its highest development in the ancient world. Chinese metallurgists had been working iron for centuries before the Han came to power, but it was during this dynasty that Chinese iron and steel production achieved levels of sophistication that wouldn't be matched elsewhere for over 1,000 years. Picture the Chinese capital of Chang'an, modern Xi'an, during the reign of Emperor Wu, around 100 BCE. With a population of nearly 250,000, it was probably the largest city in the world at that time. The city's workshops produce goods that are traded along the Silk Road from Spain to Korea: silk textiles, lacquered wood, bronze mirrors, and most importantly, iron and steel of extraordinary quality. Chinese smiths during the Han period had access to detailed written manuals that described metallurgical techniques with scientific precision. Unlike their contemporaries in Europe and Africa, who relied primarily on oral tradition and accumulated experience, Chinese craftsmen could consult texts that explained exactly how to achieve specific results. The Artificer's Record, compiled during this period, provides detailed instructions for everything, from the construction of furnaces to the proper timing of quenching operations. But Chinese iron technology was revolutionary in ways that went beyond individual craftsmanship. The Chinese had developed what was essentially industrial-scale iron production, with blast furnaces that could produce cast iron in quantities that dwarfed the output of the small forges used elsewhere in the world. These furnaces, some over 30 feet tall, could maintain the high temperatures necessary to melt iron ore completely, creating liquid iron that could be poured into molds. Imagine one of these great furnaces in operation, somewhere in the mountains of central China where iron ore and coal deposits were abundant. The furnace operates continuously for months at a time, its fires tended by teams of workers who understand every aspect of the complex process. The blast of air from water-powered bellows creates a roar that can be heard for miles, and the glow from the furnace lights up the mountainside, like an artificial sunset. The Chinese had also mastered the production of steel through techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the medieval period. They understood that the carbon content of iron determined its properties, and they had developed methods for producing steel with precisely controlled characteristics. Chinese swords from the Han period display a sophistication of metallurgy that represents one of the highest achievements of ancient technology. But perhaps most remarkably, the Chinese were using iron and steel for purposes that went far beyond weapons and tools. They were creating massive industrial infrastructure projects that demonstrated the power of iron technology when organized on a state level. The Great Wall, much of which was built during the Han period, required enormous quantities of iron tools for its construction. Chinese engineers used iron to create sophisticated mechanical devices, water-powered mills, mechanical clocks, and even early forms of suspension bridges. Let your imagination drift to a Han period iron foundry, where craftsmen are creating not weapons or agricultural tools, but precision instruments for astronomy and navigation. Chinese scientists during this period were creating iron armillary spheres, complex mechanical models of the heavens that could predict the movements of stars and planets. These devices represent a fusion of metallurgical skill and scientific knowledge that was unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. The Chinese approach to iron technology was fundamentally different from what we've seen elsewhere. Rather than individual craftsmen working in small workshops, the Chinese had created a system of state-sponsored industrial production that could undertake projects of unprecedented scale and complexity. This approach would eventually spread throughout East Asia, creating a technological foundation that would support Chinese civilization for over 2 millennia. As you drift toward deeper sleep, imagine the sounds of Han period China, the constant hammering from thousands of workshops, the creaking of water wheels that power the great blast furnaces, the songs of workers as they tend the fires that transform raw ore into the refined metal that builds an empire. This was Iron Age technology at its most sophisticated, demonstrating what human ingenuity could achieve when supported by systematic knowledge and state resources. From the workshops of Han China, let your dreams carry you westward along the Silk Road, through the markets of Samarkand and Damascus, to the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen, Rome at the height of its power. When iron technology served as the foundation for a civilization that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. Roman civilization represents perhaps the most systematic application of Iron Age technology in human history. Unlike the Greeks, who prized individual artistic achievement, or the Celts, who valued personal heroism, the Romans approached iron technology with the methodical efficiency that characterized all their endeavors. They didn't necessarily invent new techniques, but they perfected the organization and application of existing knowledge on an unprecedented scale. Picture the city of Rome itself during the reign of Trajan, around 100 CE. With over 1 million inhabitants, it was by far the largest city that had ever existed. The very existence of such a metropolis was made possible by iron technology. Iron tools to build the aqueducts that supplied fresh water, iron implements to construct the massive public buildings that housed government and commerce, iron weapons to maintain the legions that defended the far-flung frontiers. But it's not just the scale of Roman iron use that impresses, it's the systematic nature of their approach. The Romans had created what was essentially an industrial complex dedicated to iron production and distribution. In the forests of Gaul and Germania, Roman engineers had established iron-working centers that supplied metal to the entire empire. In Britain, Roman miners extracted iron ore from deposits that would continue to be worked for over 1,000 years after the empire's fall. Imagine a Roman ironworking complex in the Forest of Dean, on the border between England and Wales, around 200 CE. This is not a single forge worked by one smith, but an entire industrial settlement. Dozens of furnaces operate simultaneously, their smoke creating a permanent haze above the forest canopy. The workers live in purpose-built villages, their children attending schools where they learn not just the practical skills of metallurgy, but also reading, writing, and mathematics. The Roman approach to metallurgy was characterized by standardization and quality control that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. Roman weapons were manufactured to precise specifications, ensuring that a sword made in Britain would be identical to one produced in Syria. This standardization extended to tools, building materials, and even decorative objects, creating a unified material culture that spanned 3 continents. Let your mind drift to a Roman armory, where master smiths are producing equipment for the legions. Each sword, each spear point, each suit of mail armor is created according to patterns that have been refined through centuries of experience. The smiths work with an understanding of metallurgy that combines practical experience with theoretical knowledge derived from Greek science and Egyptian tradition. But perhaps most impressive is the Roman road system, which represented the largest construction project in human history up to that time. The roads that connected Hadrian's Wall to the Sahara Desert, that linked the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the Euphrates River, were built using iron tools on a scale that staggers the imagination. Roman engineers used iron picks and shovels to level mountains, iron hammers and chisels to cut through solid rock, iron reinforcement to strengthen bridges that would carry traffic for centuries. Picture a Roman road crew at work somewhere in the mountains of Spain, building the highway that will connect the silver mines of the interior with the ports of the Mediterranean coast. The work is backbreaking, but it's also precise. Roman roads were engineered with a sophistication that modern highway builders still admire. The foundation is laid with mathematical precision, The drainage systems are designed to last for centuries, and the paving stones are cut and fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of inches. The Roman legions themselves represent perhaps the most effective military organization in human history, an effectiveness that depended entirely on superior iron technology. Roman soldiers carried weapons and armor that were not necessarily better than those of their enemies in terms of individual craftsmanship, but were superior in terms of reliability, maintainability, and above all, quantity. A Roman legion could replace its equipment from standardized supplies, while barbarian armies had to rely on the individual output of scattered smiths. Imagine a Roman legion on campaign somewhere along the Danube frontier, around 170 CE during the Marcomannic Wars. The soldier's equipment represents the accumulated metallurgical knowledge of centuries: iron swords that combine flexibility with edge retention, iron armor that provides protection without excessive weight, iron tools that allow the legion to construct fortified camps with engineering precision that turns every temporary halt into a miniature fortress. But Roman iron technology extended far beyond military applications. In the great cities of the empire, iron was used for purposes that demonstrated a level of urban sophistication that wouldn't be matched again for over a millennium. Roman buildings used iron clamps and reinforcements that allowed architects to achieve spans and heights that would have been impossible with stone alone. Roman aqueducts used iron valves and fittings that created water pressure systems capable of supplying multi-story buildings. Let your imagination visit the baths of Caracalla in Rome, where Roman engineering created what was essentially an ancient leisure center. The complex heating system, which warmed air and water for thousands of daily visitors, relied on iron furnaces and distribution systems that demonstrate a mastery of thermal engineering. The precision-fitted pipes, the temperature controls, the ventilation systems, all represent applications of iron technology that went far beyond simple tool-making. As the Roman Empire matured, its iron technology became increasingly sophisticated. Roman smiths developed techniques for creating decorative ironwork that combined functionality with artistic beauty. Roman locks and keys, for instance, were marvels of precision engineering that provided security while displaying the aesthetic sensibilities that characterized the best Roman craftsmanship. But perhaps most significantly, Roman iron technology created the infrastructure that allowed classical civilization to flourish. The tools that built Roman libraries preserved the knowledge of antiquity. The weapons that defended Roman frontiers protected the schools where Greek philosophy was taught and Roman law was developed. The iron implements that supported Roman agriculture fed the populations that created Roman art and literature. As you settle deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine the sounds of the Roman world at twilight, the distant hammering from workshops that never ceased their production, the tramp of hobnailed boots on stone pavements built with iron tools, the splash of fountains fed by aqueducts maintained with iron implements, the conversations in a dozen languages of people whose diverse cultures were unified by the material civilization that iron technology had made possible. Beyond the borders of the Roman Empire, in the vast forests of Germania and the windswept plains of Scandinavia, other Iron Age peoples were developing their own distinctive approaches to metallurgy and craftsmanship. The Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Angles, Saxons, and dozens of others, would eventually reshape the map of Europe. But their success depended largely on their mastery of iron technology. Germanic smiths had learned their craft through contact with Celtic and Roman metallurgists, but they had adapted these techniques to their own cultural values and environmental conditions. Where Roman smiths emphasized standardization and mass production, Germanic craftsmen prized individual artistry and the creation of objects that carried personal and spiritual significance. Picture a Gothic smithy somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains around 350 CE, where a master craftsman is forging a sword for one of the tribal chiefs. The workshop is smaller than a Roman armory, heated by a single forge whose fire is fed with charcoal from the surrounding forest. But the smith's skill is no less than his Roman counterparts, and the sword he creates will be both a practical weapon and a work of art that carries the reputation of its maker and the honor of its owner. Germanic swords from this period display a level of craftsmanship that rivals anything produced in the ancient world. The technique of pattern welding, folding and forge welding strips of iron and steel to create distinctive patterns in the blade, reached its highest development in Germanic workshops. These swords were not merely weapons, they were heirlooms passed down through generations, objects that carried the history and identity of entire family lines. The names given to famous Germanic swords, Gram, Balmung Hrunting, suggest the almost mystical status these weapons held in their culture. Germanic mythology is filled with stories of magical swords forged by master smiths, weapons that could cut through armor and stone, that glowed with their own light, that chose their own wielders. These stories reflect the profound respect Germanic peoples had for the craft of metallurgy and the almost supernatural skills of master smiths. Let your mind drift to a Germanic feast hall where warriors gather to share food, drink, and stories around a great fire. The hall's pillars are decorated with iron fittings that display the same intricate interwoven patterns found on weapons and jewelry. The chieftain's throne is adorned with ironwork that proclaims his status and power. Even the everyday objects, fire dogs, cooking implements, Dr. handles, are crafted with an attention to beauty that transforms functional items into works of art. The Germanic approach to ironworking was deeply influenced by their religious beliefs and social structures. Smithing was considered a sacred craft, and mastersmiths held positions of honor comparable to priests or war leaders. The god Wayland the Smith appears in Germanic mythology as a figure of tragic power, whose skill at the forge is both a blessing and a curse. These stories suggest that Germanic peoples understood metallurgy not just as a practical technology, but as something that connected the human world to the realm of the gods. As the Western Roman Empire weakened during the 4th and 5th centuries, Germanic tribes began their great migrations that would reshape European civilization. These migrations were not chaotic invasions but rather organized movements of entire peoples, seeking new lands and opportunities. The success of these migrations depended heavily on the superior iron technology that Germanic smiths had developed. Imagine a Frankish tribe crossing the Rhine in the early 5th century, their wagons loaded with the tools and weapons necessary to establish new settlements in Gaul. The tribal smiths carry with them not just their personal tools, but the accumulated knowledge of generations of metallurgical experience. They know how to find and exploit iron ore deposits, how to construct furnaces from local materials, how to adapt their techniques to new environmental conditions. The kingdoms that emerged from these migrations, the Frankish kingdom in Gaul, the Visigothic kingdom in Spain, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in Britain, all depended on iron technology for their success, but they also preserved and transmitted the Germanic traditions of craftsmanship that valued individual artistry over mass production, personal meaning over mere utility. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the sounds of a Germanic migration, the creaking of wooden wagon wheels reinforced with iron, the jingling of horse harnesses decorated with iron fittings, the distant sound of smiths' hammers as the tribe makes camp for the night and begins the work of establishing a new settlement. This was Iron Age technology in motion, carrying the accumulated wisdom of generations into new lands where it would blend with local traditions to create new forms of metallurgical achievement. From the Germanic migrations, let your dreams carry you northward to the fjords and forests of Scandinavia, where during the later Iron Age a remarkable maritime civilization was emerging. The Vikings, Norsemen from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, would become perhaps the most famous Iron Age people, their raids and explorations taking them from Greenland to Constantinople, from the Shetland Islands to the Volga River. Viking success depended absolutely on their mastery of iron technology. Their weapons, the legendary Viking sword, the broad-bladed battle axe, the iron-tipped spear, were products of metallurgical traditions that had been refined through centuries of careful development. But perhaps even more important were their tools, the axes that felled the trees for their longships, the nails and rivets that held those ships together, the navigational instruments that guided them across uncharted seas. Picture a Viking shipyard on the shores of a Norwegian fjord around 900 CE, where master shipwrights are constructing a longship for a planned raid on the English coast. The keel is carved from a single oak tree, but every other aspect of the ship's construction depends on iron technology. Iron rivets hold the overlapping planks together in the clinker-built style that gives Viking ships their distinctive flexibility. Iron nails secure the deck beams and support structures. Iron tools shape every piece of timber with a precision that ensures the finished vessel will be both seaworthy and swift. The Viking longship represents one of the highest achievements of Iron Age technology, a fusion of sophisticated metallurgy, advanced woodworking, and profound understanding of marine engineering. These vessels could be sailed across the open ocean or rowed up shallow rivers, could be beached on any convenient shore or carried overland between waterways. The mobility they provided gave Viking raiders and traders access to an enormous geographical range that stretched from the Arctic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. But Vikings were not merely raiders and pirates. Despite their fearsome reputation, they were also traders, explorers, craftsmen, and farmers whose daily lives depended on iron technology in countless ways. In the workshop of a Viking smith, you would find not just weapons being forged, but agricultural tools, household implements, decorative objects, and the specialized equipment needed for their maritime lifestyle. Let your imagination visit such a workshop, perhaps on the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea, where a master smith is creating a set of ice skates from iron bars. These skates, which will be strapped to boots with leather bindings, will allow their wearer to travel quickly across frozen lakes and rivers during the long Scandinavian winter. They represent the kind of practical innovation that characterized Viking iron working, the adaptation of metallurgical skills to the specific demands of Northern European life. Viking smiths were also master jewelers who created some of the most beautiful metalwork of the medieval period. Their arm rings, brooches, and pendants display a distinctive artistic style that combines geometric patterns with stylized animal forms. These objects were not merely decorative, they served as portable wealth in a society that valued mobility, and they carried symbolic meanings that expressed the wearer's social status and cultural identity. The Vikings' expansion across Europe and beyond was made possible by their superior iron technology, but it also served to spread metallurgical knowledge to new regions. Viking traders carried iron goods and techniques along the river routes of Eastern Europe, establishing trading posts that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Viking settlers in Iceland, Greenland, and briefly in North America carried their smithing skills to lands where ironworking had previously been unknown. Picture a Viking settlement in Iceland around 1000 CE, where colonists from Norway have established farms in the shadow of active volcanoes. The volcanic activity that makes the island geologically unstable also provides an abundant source of bog iron, which the Viking smiths have learned to exploit. The iron tools they produce enable the colonists to clear forests, build houses, and establish the agricultural foundation necessary for permanent settlement. The sagas, the great narrative literature of medieval Iceland, preserve detailed descriptions of Viking metallurgy and its social significance. Famous weapons are given names and histories, their creation attributed to legendary smiths whose skills are described in almost supernatural terms. These stories, while not historically accurate in every detail, preserve authentic insights into how Viking society understood and valued the craft of ironworking. But perhaps most remarkably, Viking iron technology enabled explorations that reached farther than any other medieval European civilization. Viking settlements in Greenland, which lasted for several centuries, depended entirely on iron tools for their survival in one of the world's harshest environments. The brief Viking presence in North America, at Lonso Meadows in Iseln, Newfoundland, represents the westernmost extension of Iron Age technology before Columbus's. The night deepens, and you settle into the most peaceful stages of sleep. Imagine the sounds of a Viking settlement, the ring of hammers from the smithy, the scrape of iron tools against wood as shipwrights shape a new vessel, the splash of oars as a longship returns from a successful trading voyage, the crackle of fires where families gather to share stories of distant lands and legendary heroes. This was Iron Age civilization at its most adventurous, using metallurgical skills to explore and settle some of the most remote and challenging environments on Earth. From the cold fjords of Scandinavia, let your dreams carry you southward to the warm deserts and fertile river valleys where Islamic civilization was flourishing during the later Iron Age. The rise of Islam in the 7th century created a vast cultural and economic zone that stretched from Spain to Central Asia, and within this zone, metallurgical knowledge from many different traditions was preserved, synthesized, and advanced. Islamic smiths inherited techniques from Persian, Byzantine, Indian, and classical traditions, but they didn't merely preserve this knowledge, they improved upon it, creating metallurgical innovations that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. The great centers of Islamic learning, Damascus, Baghdad, Cordoba, Samarkand, were also centers of advanced metallurgy, where theoretical knowledge combined with practical experience to produce remarkable achievements. Picture the workshops of Damascus during the Abbasid period. Around 900 CE, where master smiths are creating steel of such quality that Damascus steel becomes synonymous throughout the world with the finest metallurgy. The techniques they use combine Persian methods of steel production with Indian knowledge of wootz steel, creating blades that display the distinctive, watered patterns that make Damascus steel instantly recognizable. But Damascus steel is more than just beautiful. It represents a level of metallurgical sophistication that demonstrates the advanced scientific understanding of Islamic smiths. The watered patterns are not merely decorative. They reflect the internal structure of the steel, revealing the careful control of carbon content and forging techniques that give Damascus blades their legendary sharpness and flexibility. Let your mind drift to a Damascus workshop where a master craftsman is forging a sword for a Mamluk warrior. The smith doesn't work alone. He is assisted by specialists who understand every aspect of the complex process. One tends the fire, maintaining exactly the right temperature for each stage of forging. Another prepares the specialized quenching solutions that will determine the final properties of the blade. A third monitors the folding and welding process that creates the steel's distinctive internal structure. The Islamic world also preserved and advanced the scientific understanding of metallurgy through written texts that wouldn't appear in Europe for centuries. Arab and Persian scholars wrote detailed treatises on mining, smelting, and metalworking that combined practical instructions with theoretical explanations based on Greek science and direct observation. The great scholar Al-Jazari, working in the early 13th century, wrote extensively about mechanical devices that depended on sophisticated metalworking. His designs for water clocks, automated fountains, and mechanical servants required precision casting and machining that demonstrate the advanced state of Islamic metallurgy. These devices, while often created for the entertainment of wealthy patrons, represented significant advances in understanding the properties of metals and the possibilities of precision engineering. Picture one of Al-Jazari's workshops, perhaps in the palace of a Kurdish prince in eastern Anatolia, where craftsmen are creating a mechanical peacock that will serve wine to guests at royal banquets. The device requires dozens of precisely fitted metal parts, gears, springs, valves, and joints, all created with tolerances that wouldn't be achieved elsewhere for centuries. The fusion of artistic vision and technical skill that such objects represent demonstrates the highest achievements of Iron Age metallurgy. Islamic metalworkers also excelled in decorative techniques that combined iron and steel with precious metals to create objects of extraordinary beauty. The technique of damascening, inlaying gold and silver wire into iron surfaces, reached its highest development in Islamic workshops. Swords, armor, and decorative objects created using these techniques display a level of artistic sophistication that rivals the finest work of any period. Islamic world's extensive trade networks also served to spread metallurgical knowledge across vast distances. Islamic merchants and craftsmen carried ironworking techniques along the Silk Road to China, across the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia, and through the trans-Saharan routes to West Africa. This transmission of knowledge enriched local traditions while creating new syntheses of metallurgical technique. Let your imagination follow a caravan of Islamic merchants crossing the Sahara around 1100 CE, their camels loaded with finished metalwork from the workshops of North Africa. The caravan includes not just traders, but skilled craftsmen who will establish workshops in the trading cities of West Africa, teaching local smiths new techniques while learning from indigenous traditions of ironworking. The Islamic period also saw significant advances in mining and smelting technology. Islamic engineers developed improved furnace designs that could achieve higher temperatures and more efficient extraction of metal from ore. They also advanced the understanding of metallurgical chemistry, developing new alloys and improving existing ones through careful experimentation and observation. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine the sounds of an Islamic city at twilight, the call to prayer from the minaret, the distant hammering from the metalworking quarter, the splash of fountains fed by ingenious mechanical systems, the soft conversation of scholars discussing metallurgical texts in the light of oil lamps. This was Iron Age knowledge preserved, advanced and transmitted across cultures, creating a foundation for future technological development. As our long journey through the Iron Age draws toward its conclusion, we find ourselves in a world that is both the culmination of ancient metallurgical traditions and the beginning of something new. By the year 1000 CE, iron technology had spread to virtually every inhabited continent, and local traditions of smithing had developed distinctive characteristics that reflected the cultures and environments in which they emerged. This was the period when water power first began to be systematically applied to metallurgy, when the first blast furnaces appeared in Europe, when mining began to be conducted on an industrial scale. These developments mark the beginning of the transition from the Iron Age, proper to the medieval period of technological development, that would eventually lead to the Industrial Revolution. Picture a water-powered forge in the forests of medieval Germany around 1150 CE, where monks from a nearby monastery have harnessed a stream to operate massive bellows that can maintain furnace temperatures higher than any previously achieved. The forge operates continuously, producing iron in quantities that would have amazed earlier generations of smiths. But this is no longer individual craftsmanship, it's the beginning of industrial production. Yet even as technology became more systematic and large-scale, traditional craftsmanship continued to flourish. The great cathedrals being built across Europe during this period required enormous quantities of iron for construction: nails, hinges, reinforcement bars, decorative elements. But they also showcased the artistic possibilities of metalwork through elaborate door fittings, candlesticks, and liturgical objects that represented the highest achievements of medieval smithing. Let your mind drift to the workshop of a cathedral metalworker, perhaps at Chartres or Notre Dame de Paris, where craftsmen are creating the ironwork that will serve both practical and spiritual functions. The great doors of the cathedral require hinges and locks of unprecedented size and strength, but they also need decorative elements that will inspire awe and devotion in the faithful. The smith who creates these elements must be both engineer and artist, combining technical skill with spiritual understanding. The end of the Iron Age was not a sudden event, but a gradual transformation that occurred at different times in different places. In some parts of the world, Iron Age traditions continued unchanged well into the modern period. In others, technological innovations began the process that would lead to the complex industrial societies of today. But regardless of when or where the transition occurred, the legacy of the Iron Age remained constant. The fundamental techniques of metallurgy, mining, smelting, forging, heat treatment, remained essentially unchanged from the first Iron Age smiths to the industrial workers of the 19th century. The tools might become more sophisticated, the scale of production might increase dramatically, but the basic processes developed during the Iron Age remained the foundation of all subsequent metallurgical achievement. As you rest in perfect comfort, breathing slowly and deeply, let your mind contemplate the extraordinary journey we've shared. From the first tentative experiments with meteoric iron in Bronze Age workshops, to the sophisticated metallurgical industries of the late medieval period, the Iron Age represents one of humanity's greatest technological achievements, the mastery of the most useful metal ever discovered. But the Iron Age gave humanity more than just better tools and weapons. It provided the technological foundation that made possible all subsequent developments in human civilization. The iron plowshares that enabled agricultural expansion, the iron tools that built the first great cities, the iron weapons that defended the first complex states, the iron implements that supported the first industrial processes. All of these developments trace their ancestry to the anonymous smiths who first learned to extract metal from ore in ancient forges. The social and cultural implications of iron technology were equally profound. The democratization of metal tools, the fact that iron ore was abundant and could be worked locally, helped create more egalitarian societies and enabled technological knowledge to spread more rapidly than ever before. The specialization required for advanced metallurgy led to the development of guilds, professional associations, and educational institutions that preserved and transmitted technical knowledge across generations. The Iron Age also established patterns of innovation and technological development that continue to influence us today. The gradual accumulation of knowledge, the careful refinement of techniques, the creative adaptation of existing methods to new purposes. All of these approaches to technological development were established during the Iron Age and remain characteristic of human innovation. Today, picture a modern laboratory where materials scientists are developing new alloys for aerospace applications, using computer models and electron microscopes to understand the atomic structure of metals. The fundamental questions they ask: how can we make metals stronger? How can we control their properties more precisely? How can we adapt existing materials to new purposes? Are the same questions that Iron Age smiths asked, Even though the tools available to answer them have become infinitely more sophisticated, the artistic legacy of the Iron Age is equally enduring. The decorative techniques developed by Celtic, Viking, Islamic, and other Iron Age craftsmen continue to influence contemporary art and design. The understanding that functional objects can also be beautiful, that technical skill can be combined with artistic vision, that craftsmanship itself is a form of creative expression. These insights, first fully developed during the Iron Age, remain central to human culture today. As the final moments of our journey through the Iron Age fade into the peaceful silence of deep sleep, hold on to the image of fire, the sacred fire that burns in every forge. From the humblest village smithy to the most advanced research facility, this fire represents the eternal human quest to understand and reshape the natural world, to transform raw materials into objects of utility and beauty, to pass on accumulated knowledge to future generations, who will build upon our achievements just as we have built upon those of our ancestors. The Iron Age is over, but its spirit lives on in every act of creation, in every moment of discovery, in every effort to make the world more beautiful, more useful, more responsive to human needs and aspirations. We are all inheritors of the Iron Age, carriers of the ancient knowledge that first taught humanity to master the most transformative technology ever discovered. Sleep well, and dream of the eternal forge where human creativity and natural materials combine to create wonders that our ancestors could never have imagined, but that they made possible through their patient, careful, persistent efforts to unlock the secrets hidden within the earth itself. In the deepest silence of the night, when the last echoes of our Iron Age journey have faded into the realm of dreams, one image remains, the eternal flame that connects every forge that has ever burned. From the first tentative experiments with meteoric iron to the fusion reactors that may power our future. This fire is more than mere combustion. It is the symbol of human curiosity, creativity, and determination. It represents the spark of innovation that drives our species to constantly seek better ways of doing things, to transform the raw materials of nature into objects that serve human purposes, to leave the world more beautiful and functional than we found it. The smiths of the Iron Age, working by firelight in workshops whose locations have been forgotten by history, lit this eternal flame. Their patient experimentation, their careful observation, their willingness to try new techniques and pass on their knowledge to apprentices, created the foundation upon which all subsequent human achievement has been built. Every tool you use, every building you enter, every vehicle you ride, every electronic device that connects you to the world, all of these things trace their ancestry back to those ancient forges where unknown craftsmen first learned to shape iron according to human will. But the legacy of the Iron Age extends beyond mere technology. It encompasses the values and attitudes that make human progress possible, the belief that knowledge can be accumulated and transmitted, that present conditions can be improved through human effort, that cooperation and specialization can accomplish what no individual could achieve alone. As sleep claims you completely, carrying you into the restorative darkness where minds and bodies renew themselves, remember that you are part of this continuing story. The same creative spirit that drove Iron Age smiths to experiment with new alloys drives modern scientists to explore new frontiers. The same dedication to craftsmanship that created the masterpieces of Celtic metalwork inspires contemporary artists and designers. The same desire to improve the human condition that motivated ancient engineers to build roads and aqueducts continues to motivate those who work to solve the challenges of today and tomorrow. The Iron Age is over, but the Age of Iron continues. In every act of creation, in every moment of discovery, in every effort to make life better for ourselves and our descendants, we kindle anew the ancient flame that our Iron Age ancestors first lit in their forges so many centuries ago. Rest now in the knowledge that you are heir to one of humanity's greatest achievements, and that the future holds possibilities that even the most visionary Iron Age craftsmen could never have imagined, possibilities that will be realized by future generations who build upon our work just as we have built upon the work of those who came before us. The fire burns eternal. The story continues. And in your dreams, perhaps you will hear the distant ring of hammer on anvil, the whisper of bellows feeding ancient flames, and the voices of long-dead smiths sharing their secrets with apprentices yet to be born. Now, as our long journey through the Iron Age draws toward its close, let your dreams carry you into the twilight years of the ancient world. When the great civilizations we visited began their slow transformation into something new, this was not a sudden collapse but rather a gradual change. Like the imperceptible shift from autumn to winter, as the classical Iron Age gave way to what historians would later call the medieval period. The transformation began differently in different parts of the world, but everywhere it involved changes in how iron technology was organized, transmitted, and applied. In the Roman Empire, the centralized industrial system that had produced iron on an unprecedented scale gradually gave way to smaller, more localized production. As political unity fractured and long-distance trade became more difficult, the great ironworking centers of the empire were abandoned in favor of local forges that served immediate regional needs. Picture a former Roman ironworking site in Gaul, around 450 CE. The great furnaces that once roared day and night have fallen silent, their fires cold for decades. Nature is already beginning to reclaim the industrial complex. Vines grow through the walls of abandoned workshops, and forest animals make their homes in the ruins of what was once a center of imperial production. But this is not simply a story of decline. Nearby, in a small village that has grown up around what was once a minor outpost of the Roman system, a new kind of smith has established his forge. He is probably a descendant of the workers who once labored in the great complex, but his approach to metallurgy is different from his ancestors. Where Roman smiths worked according to standardized imperial specifications, this village craftsman adapts his techniques to local needs and available materials. His workshop is smaller than the Roman installations, but in some ways more versatile. He can produce plowshares for local farmers, weapons for the village's defense, tools for woodworkers and builders, and decorative items for the local church. His knowledge of metallurgy may be less systematic than that of his Roman predecessors, but it's more closely integrated with the daily life of his community. This pattern was repeated throughout the former Roman territories. As centralized authority weakened, iron production became more localized but also in many ways more creative. The elaborate decorative ironwork that characterizes early medieval art, the intricate patterns of Celtic and Germanic metalwork, the sophisticated sword-making traditions that produce legendary weapons like Durandal and Excalibur emerged from workshops that were smaller than their Roman counterparts but no less skilled. Let your imagination drift to an Anglo-Saxon smithy in 7th century England, where a master craftsman is creating a sword for a local chieftain. This is not mass production according to imperial standards, but individual artistry that treats each weapon as a unique creation. The smith folds and reforges the steel repeatedly, creating patterns in the metal that are both functional and beautiful. The finished blade will be not just a tool of war, but a work of art that carries the smith's reputation and the warrior's honor. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, Iron Age traditions continued and evolved along different paths. In China, the fall of the Han dynasty led not to the abandonment of iron technology, but to its further refinement. Chinese smiths during the period of disunity that followed Han developed new techniques for steel production that would eventually be transmitted to other parts of Asia through trade and conquest. In the Islamic world, which was rapidly expanding during this period, scholars and craftsmen were preserving and extending the metallurgical knowledge of antiquity. In the workshops of Damascus and Toledo, Baghdad and Cordoba, Muslim smiths were creating steel of such quality that Damascus steel became synonymous with the finest metallurgy in the world. Picture a forge in medieval Damascus, around 800 CE, where a master swordsmith is creating a blade using techniques that combine Persian tradition, Indian knowledge, and Greek science. The resulting weapon will display the distinctive watered pattern that makes Damascus steel instantly recognizable, but more importantly, it will possess a combination of hardness and flexibility that represents one of the highest achievements of pre-industrial metallurgy. But perhaps the most significant development during this transitional period was the spread of iron technology to parts of the world where it had previously been unknown or limited. In sub-Saharan Africa, iron-working techniques spread along trade routes and migration paths, enabling the development of new civilizations and the expansion of existing ones. Imagine a Bantu village in what is now Zimbabwe, around 600 CE, where local smiths are adapting iron-working techniques learned from northern neighbors to local conditions. The iron they produce will enable the agricultural expansion that supports the growth of what will eventually become the Great Zimbabwe Civilization, one of medieval Africa's most impressive achievements. Similarly, In Southeast Asia and the Pacific, iron technology was spreading through trade networks and cultural exchange, enabling the development of more complex societies and more sophisticated material cultures. The kingdoms of Java and Sumatra, the chiefdoms of the Philippines, the emerging states of mainland Southeast Asia, all were benefiting from the transformative power of iron technology. As our journey through the Iron Age draws to its close, it's worth reflecting on what this long period of human history accomplished. The Iron Age gave humanity the tools to reshape the natural world on an unprecedented scale. It enabled the growth of cities, the development of complex states, the creation of trade networks that spanned continents, and the emergence of artistic and intellectual traditions that still influence us today. But perhaps most importantly, the Iron Age demonstrated the cumulative nature of human knowledge. Each generation of smiths built on the discoveries of their predecessors, gradually refining techniques, solving problems, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The Celtic swordsmith who created a blade of pattern-welded steel was applying knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries of experimentation by countless anonymous craftsmen. This process of cumulative technological development, which began in the Iron Age, would continue through the medieval period and into the modern era. The techniques developed by Iron Age smiths would evolve into the water-powered machinery of the medieval period, which in turn would give rise to the steam engines of the Industrial Revolution, which would ultimately lead to the sophisticated metallurgy that makes modern civilization possible. As you drift into the deepest stages of sleep, let your mind hold on to the image of fire, the fire that burns in every forge. From the simple hearths of Bronze Age Anatolia to the great blast furnaces of Han China, from the village smithies of medieval Europe to the industrial complexes of the modern world, fire, and the human knowledge of how to control it, has been the constant companion of our species throughout its long journey from prehistory to the present. The Iron Age is over, but its legacy lives on in every piece of steel, in every tool, in every structure that shapes our modern world. We are still, in many ways, people of the Iron Age, carrying forward the knowledge and traditions that our ancestors developed during those crucial centuries when humanity first learned to master the most useful of all metals. And so our journey through the Iron Age comes to an end, but like all endings, it is also a beginning. As you rest in the comfort of your bed, breathing slowly and deeply, let your mind hold on to the images we've shared, the first tentative experiments with meteoric iron and Bronze Age workshops, the great migrations that carried ironworking knowledge across continents, the sophisticated civilizations that used iron technology to create lasting monuments to human achievement. The Iron Age was more than just a period when people learned to work a new metal. It was the era when humanity gained the tools to reshape the world according to human will and imagination. Every city, every road, every bridge, every machine that we use today traces its ancestry back to those first iron tools created in ancient forges. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Iron Age is not technological, but cultural. The Iron Age taught humanity that knowledge is cumulative, that each generation can build on the achievements of previous generations to create something greater than what existed before. This understanding, that human beings can continuously improve their condition through the application of knowledge and skill, is perhaps the most precious inheritance we have received from our Iron Age ancestors. As sleep takes you deeper into peaceful rest, remember that you are part of this continuing story. The same creative spirit that drove anonymous smiths to experiment with new techniques, that inspired Celtic craftsmen to create works of lasting beauty, that enabled Roman engineers to build monuments that still stand today, lives on in every human being who seeks to understand the world and improve the condition of humanity. The forges of the Iron Age have long since grown cold, but the fire they kindled, the fire of human curiosity, creativity and determination, burns on, in laboratories and workshops, in schools and universities, in the minds of inventors and artists and dreamers. That ancient fire continues to illuminate the path toward new discoveries, new creations, new possibilities for human flourishing. Sleep well, and dream of fire and metal, of ancient smiths and distant civilizations, of the long human journey from the first tentative experiments with iron to the sophisticated technologies of the modern world. And know that you are part of this continuing story, carrying forward the legacy of the Iron Age into whatever new age is waiting to be born.